action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try.
Hello and welcome to Call to Action, the go-to podcast for anyone trying to make sense of the world of marketing, advertising and beyond. In an industry that is a minefield of utter bollocks, we aim to capture our heroes and allies from the front line to have a chinwag with. It's like Pokemon Go, with the single but vital exception that it's not a short-term bandwagon of shite. It's brought to you by Gasp and I'm Giles Edwards. Today I've caught Laura J.B., an award-winning creative, digital pioneer and trained taxidermist. Laura is a total Adland powerhouse. Currently, she's the president and chief creative officer at Grey London, dishing out delicious work for some of the world's biggest brands. If that wasn't enough, she's also co-founder of world-famous initiatives She Says, Oko and Can't Festival. A former D&AD president and true champion for diversity, Laura believes in using the power of creativity to make positive change. Laura says, I always loved advertising. It's not anything I ever thought I would go into, but then I realised that actually you can have quite a lot of influence, which is what advertising is all about. In terms of making the world more progressive or making people work together or understand each other in different ways. Welcome to the show, Laura.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Right, 7 quick fires, Laura. Mac or PC?
Mac.
London or Sydney?
Oh, that is that's a really, really hard one. I've been in London for 20 years plus now, and I do love it. My family is here, but I would say Sydney is always my home. I love London dearly, but I think Sydney just pips it to the post.
It's a mean question, isn't it? Chaotic or good?
Oh, that's another really, really hard question. I think it's got to be the mixture of the both of them. I think I've always kind of been on the side of good, in everything that I do, but I am ultimately chaotic at my heart. Maybe chaos.
Art or advertising?
I think. Oh God, such hard questions. I know they're quick fire. I'll say art, but again, they're both brilliant things. I think advertising, you have more of an impact and more influence, and you can say bigger things. But again, I come from fine art background, and I think that will always be my love, and it's where I get my inspiration from.
Yeah, that's well said. Well, there's a lovely quote from you: creativity doesn't have to have an advertising shaped border on it. So that adds a bit of context there as to how unfair that question was. Speaking of unfair questions, Pringles Meat Frank or Volvo Ultimate Safety Test?
Oh, that is so mean. I am going to have to say Meat Frank because of my absolute fascination with zombies.
Brilliant. Great rationale. Sound or music?
Music. I think, it has been such a fundamental part of my life. Again, it's where a lot of my inspiration comes from. I loved it. I actually just finished listening to a almost 5-hour podcast episode on Nine Inch Nails, which was phenomenal. Music.
And finally, comfortable or uncomfortable?
Uncomfortable. All the time.
That was a tap in. We finished with a tap in.
Yeah.
Amazing. Laura, I can't thank you enough for joining us. This is the second time you've joined us. We're not going to talk about the first time you joined us, but listeners can probably guess that something might have gone a bit Pete Tong. But thank you. So to start the show, we always like every guest to describe the linear and not so linear paths that they have taken in their careers. So you famously cut your teeth as a key figure in Australia's Geekgirl hyperzine in the early 90s.
Mm-hmm.
So I want to know more about that. But before that, what was your first ever job? And then what was your first proper job?
Right. Okay. So my first ever job, bar delivering newspapers, which, I grew up in the countryside, kind of in a rural area. So that was like getting in my mum's car and driving really long distances between houses. Wasn't really a job, but my first proper job was when I was 15. I worked at Cut Price Deli in the very first Westfield in Sydney, which was in Hornsby. And for those of you who can remember, in Oz Cut Price Deli, I won't sing the song, it had a theme song. It was like the Walmart of delis in a way. You had a special uniform. It was very uncomfortable. It was all made of kind of awful syntheticness with a little red tie and a little kind of special hat. And my job was kind of slicing meat and working behind the cheese counter. And I did that, after schools and on weekends. It was pretty, it was a pretty special job. weighing out, industrial sized quantities of chicken breasts to people in the mall.
Oh wow! I always, there's this horrible stereotype that I shouldn't entertain, but it's too late now, of everyone assuming Australians grow up, I don't know, sheep farming or doing something on rural land. Was that ever part of your growing up?
Yes, I grew up. It's a hobby farm. It wasn't so it was, which means it's kind of the size of a small farm. It was 5 acres. We had a farm next to us that was still ploughed with Clydesdales when I was a kid. We had no tarmac on the road. It was all dirt. But my parents are still there and they grow everything. But it's not a farm as such. Not really producing stuff. But grew up around goats and donkeys and went to an agricultural high school. So. I did farm mechanics for the equivalent of GCSE. So if you ever need your tractor fixed or what have you, I'm your gal.
What a skill! So you said in the quote I used for your intro, you said you always loved advertising. Did that inform your decisions on going to college or university, whatever the equivalent might be?
No, not at all. Actually, I went to, although the school I went to is an agricultural school, it's kind of quite a nerdy school. It's the equivalent of a grammar. And I always loved creative stuff, but I was always really, really good at maths and science and what have you. And had a real battle and, a lot of conversation, I'd say, with my parents as well about where to next. My grades were really great. I could have gone and done whatever. But just the pull of doing something creative was so strong. And so, I think after having many conversations with my parents about, could you combine the two and what about architectural industrial design or something, I kind of went, no, I want to go and do fine art. And kind of off I went to, it's not called College of Fine Art anymore, but it's part of the University of New South Wales, went off there to study fine art. And really, I'd done a little bit of experience in a design agency before computers were around. So like when I was about 15, when you still hand stamping and using a bromide machine, I went in there for a week and basically operated the bromide machine for a week, which is probably going to kill me. But had no plans to go into advertising at all. I just was passionate and driven about making art, and I was always really passionate about kind of a certain kind of art, like very political, a very kind of consciously socially based, I guess, kind of art. So very heavily influenced, very into feminism and very into equality, and particularly around gender equality and what have you, and sort of queer themes. And so that there was a lot of work. That's where I was interested. I was interested in what you could communicate with your work, not just making something beautiful. And actually, a lot of what I made wasn't very beautiful at all. It was much more about getting the message across and kind of playing with tropes of women's role in society and that kind of thing. And I was also heavily involved in the politics of the university as well. I was the women's officer and was president for a year. So that's what really drove me. That the thing I could see, which is that creativity is this incredibly powerful, fundamentally human force that drives us forward. And by using that in order to communicate, you can create incredible change, right? Much more, I think, than what you can potentially as a politician or whatever. So that's really where I was. But there was no, and I think this is talking about being uncomfortable. I think this kind of, I've always been very, very driven, but not towards particularly a goal. I've been driven to learn. I've been driven to experiment with new things. I've been driven to push myself out of my comfort zone. I've been driven by this passion for changing things through creativity. But yeah, never, ever, ever in a million years did I think I was going to land in advertising.
Yeah, I find it encouraging how many people I talk to have said that, who have then subsequently landed in advertising. And I think they're all the better for it, to be quite honest. I'm always fascinated by how there's this kind of hazy space between art and our industry. And I went through art college and did my art foundation at Kingston, so on and so forth. And the majority of my peers did go into industries or sectors which are obviously which are more kind of fine art. But it never really appealed to me because, to steal your words, doing something that has a purpose, a social purpose, whatever it might be, just seems so much more powerful and exciting than doing art for the sake of art. And I know that people can easily criticize certain creators within the industry who perhaps would have made better artists because they're more hung up with the aesthetic rather than they are about what it's actually doing. So that's really interesting that early on you had that awareness that you wanted to do creative that had a purpose and actually achieve something.
Yeah, and I think that's where, sort of coming back to, I guess, Geekgirl. So I was in, I want to say maybe my second year of university when Netscape came out. So I'd been, what I realized when I went to university, first of all, I had painting as a major. And within the first 12 weeks, realized it wasn't for me because that 12-week induction course was you had to paint a sphere, a cube, and a pyramid on a plinth, all painted white. You had to paint it in black and white, then a warm color and white, then a cool color and white, and then realistic colors. And at the end of those 12 weeks, I handed in something which was absolutely not realistic colors at all. My teacher pulled me up in front of the class and went, "Oh, I see we have a colorist amongst us." And just the idea that you had to follow the rules didn't really suit me. I found it really stifling. And at the time, my minor was in photography, and part of photography was a very, very fledgling kind of digital art bit. So alongside more traditional photography, we were being taught some digital skills, and I had an amazing teacher there called Linda Dement, who is just the best. And look her up because she has made the most groundbreaking, again, feminist, breaking gender norms, work in the early 90s on CD-ROM and what have you. She's really cool. And she, I think, kind of realized that I had quite an aptitude for it. Everything was HyperCard, or Photoshop was around, but the net wasn't there. So she used to let me go into the master's lab, and in the master's lab they had Mosaic on a computer in there, and she was like, "This is the cool thing." That's where she hid all those silicon graphics machines which she used for all of her own work and what have you. So it's this tiny little really dark room with lots of whirring, and I would just sit in there. It just blew my mind. Particularly this thought that as an artist, suddenly your audience doesn't have to be the people standing in front of your work. Suddenly they could be anywhere in the world, even though everywhere in the world was such a small place back then. And then Netscape hit, and I'm like, right, that is my thing. So I got really, 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 I'd been making stuff in Director. I'd been kind of experimenting with animation, interactive stuff, and CD-ROM type stuff. And then thought the web's my thing because I can put something out there and anyone else that has the web, whoever that was, however many thousand people, can see my stuff. So I was really exploring that space. And at the same time, this is 1994, 95, when I think I met Rosie Cross from Geekgirl. I'd come across this hyperzine, and the hyperzine is like a magazine with a replicated online magazine. She's an incredible, I guess, digital icon. She's been around there, talking about technology, feminism, cyberfeminism, forever. And she built this really great, it was almost like, it kind of looked like a fanzine. And I went to the launch and I just thought it was the coolest thing ever. And then as a secondary job, to kind of put myself through university, I used to, with my friends, take secondhand clothes and kind of mend them or stitch them or make them interesting and sell them at the local flea market at Glebe Market. And then one day I was sitting there in the baking sun and I thought I'd go for a walk around the market, and she was there with a little table with her magazine, which was probably issue 2 or 3, and a roll of stickers that say put down your pony and pick up a computer, and girls need modems. And I thought, oh, this is just so cool. Got talking to her. I was wearing like a crop top, and I've got quite a big, like an Escher tattoo on my stomach of interconnected sort of scorpions and spiders. And she saw it. She went, "That's amazing. It's a web, the World Wide Web. Can I take a picture of it for Geekgirl?" And I was such a fangirl. I'm like, yes, of course you can. And then she called me a couple of weeks later and said the photographer's pulled out, so you're not going to do it. And I went, well, I do photography at uni. I could take a picture of my own stomach. I ended up, I think, using a photo booth in what was called the old Remo store on Oxford Street in Sydney, but kind of went in there and took some pictures of my stomach and went, here you go. And then she said, oh, the person designing the magazine, and kind of online stuff has pulled out, so we're not going to have that issue. And I went, well, I've done some of this at university, I can help. Not realizing that you don't design, printed material in things like Photoshop. There are actually pieces of software for it. It was like really like learn as you go, and kind of cobbling together this website. Before there weren't any tools to build websites back then. It was just you just did it in Notepad. So did everything by hand and tested it and saw whether it worked and went back and re-edited it. Yeah, she just then said, do you want to come and do this with me, and everything you learn how to do, you've got a place for it on the web. And I was just like, yes. So that's kind of how I got involved in it. And it was amazing because I remember, I don't know when it was, it might have been 1998 or something like that. It was like written up as one of the top 20 websites in the world. It was, huge. I think it was super cool. But, it really was just made by like a couple of us, mostly around at her house or kind of in my bedroom. And she's an incredible journalist and writer, and she'd do, a lot of the writing, the interviews, what have you. And I would do a lot of the design and animation. And yeah, that was that. Sorry, I think I went on a tangent there, but
No. It was brilliant. It was excellent. And actually, it's really interesting. I wonder was it just because everything was so new that, and perhaps there were no barriers to entry. It was all very, I don't know what the right word is, democratic maybe. The fact that you could just dive into new forms of media and just learn how to put it together and just create things.
I mean, I think that was the beauty of the web, was that you could literally view source, right? That's how everyone learnt. And you had people like Joshua Davis back in the day as well, when Flash kind of started to take off, who would publish all of his code, and you'd take it and you'd hack it and you'd see what happened. And that's how you learnt. And actually, I would say everything that I've learnt on the job, which has been amazing, and then kind of moving into kind of first proper job. So I started my own agency when I was at uni. It was really me and then my brother when I needed some like hardcore coding, because he's phenomenal. And it was called Joystick Digital Media, which at the time I thought was like a joke on. It was kind of like a gamer bro dick joke in a way. But I realized that I could make money out of the stuff that I was doing for my art, because no one, there weren't a lot of people who could kind of cut and code stuff, and there were no filters on Photoshop, and I knew how to do all of that by hand. So I realized that, oh right, I can start to do this. So I go into often an advertising agency, spend 72 hours taking their Photoshop files and turning it into something that was usable, and then they'd go, this page needs a form. How does the information go from the computer to where does it go to? And I'm like, right, you need a database. So write them a database, build their stuff, and that's kind of really how I got started. Wasn't really advertising, but in building things for brands.
Yeah, well, I mean, since we last recorded, actually, you've written a fantastic piece in Adweek where you talk about the business of commercial creativity. Is that the main hook, do you think, that then made you follow that career into Adland?
Yeah, well, I think the kind of interesting bit was, as I was kind of getting this business off the ground, I was still studying. I was living in a kind of an art commune called Imperial Slacks, which is kind of based in Surrey Hills, which is now very posh in Sydney, but at the time was like rough as. And we were all people that had gone to or were going to art school together, studying various things, and we had a gallery in the middle of our space, and it was a very collaborative, very like uber creative space. And we still do kind of speak and spend a lot of time, with each other. There's lots of collaborations that go on. Most of the people that belong to that kind of collective have gone on to be professional artists, and some of them quite famous, artists as well, and represented Australia at the Biennale and all of that kind of stuff. So I was around like amazing people doing amazing things and being really challenged. And, I'm so hungry to learn new things. And then I think when I kind of started to move into the more commercial space, equally, I was still kind of surrounded. My office was in the same. I just took out on 2 bedrooms in this space. So I had my bedroom, then I had my office, and we still had the gallery, and we still had like people going backwards and forwards and doing little projects for people for their artworks, and I was still making art, and it just seemed like a really natural kind of flow. And then once I left university, that's the thing. I did my bachelor's, I did my master's, I extended that over a longer period of time so I could kind of work as well. And then I started another master's degree at the same university. I'd done like a master's by coursework. I kind of started a master's by research. And so I was always kind of involved at uni, and I was always had an arts practice. But that work bit took up more and more time. And I actually also was teaching at the university a couple of days a week because I was helping them set up a digital media course, because they, as I said before, then it was kind of sat as an adjunct of photography. So, doing lots of things, but very much still involved in art. And it was actually when I was with my students at the university, which kind of took me even kind of further into the commercial world. So, we'd get amazing speakers coming to talk from all over the world. This amazing person called Simon Woodfall, who I don't know if anyone knows, but he's another ex-D&AD president, total like visionary and like crazy beautiful person. He came to speak to my students, and I think he came and he was wearing a dress and he had purple mohawk, and he was showing this digital work that was so cool compared to the commercial work that was happening in Australia. It was more akin to the stuff I was making as art. And I just thought, that is the coolest company. I want to work for you. And he was opening an agency, a branch of his agency, Deep End, in Sydney. So I spoke to him and just kind of said, I want to come and work for you. And honestly, it was his kind of mentorship and support. Over the next 12 months or so, he was like, well, I only hire the best designers in the world, and you have no design training. So
fair comment.
Like there's something, but I think he saw something really, really interesting in me, and what have you. And so when he'd come back to Sydney, we'd catch up, and I'd share my portfolio again, and he'd still kind of say, it's not really, you're still not one of the best designers in Sydney, Laura. And then, but I just persevered, and we just really, really got on. And he would kind of challenge me to make my work better, and I'd respond to that. And then finally he said, look, there's a job going. It's not as a designer, it's a producer. But would you come and work at Deep End? And I was like, yep, done. goodbye running my own company. Hello, Deep End. And that was phenomenal, because suddenly I was with the best designers in Sydney, like sitting right next to them, learning from them. And I was there for, I want to say maybe a year before really it was, he helped me move to London, to the head office, and he said, look, there's a job as a designer now, but it's the most junior designer. And if you want to come to London and work for 12 grand a year, come on over. And I was like, yep, done. So packed up Sydney, came over here, and then I was working with the best designers in the world. And like I love, like, my very first desk mate was actually Lolly from McCann, who we shared a desk space when I first moved over, which was wonderful. But yeah, that's kind of how I got to London, and how I really it was the most incredible space. It was so punk, and it was such good energy, and it was so experimental, and so many wildly talented and just wild people working there. It was real, it was real buzz. I absolutely loved it. And then, unfortunately, the .com crash happened, and Deep End closed its doors. Not in Sydney, actually; it's still running, but most other places in the world, unfortunately.
What I find really interesting is that you come from a tech background, well, you're an art background and a tech background, given you're one of the first coders, really. But I've heard you speak about something you believe in being the idea that creativity is that fundamental force, but we've relied too much on tech at the expense of creativity. Is that something that seemed to happen following your move to London? Did you notice that happening over the next decade or so? Or was that a very modern thing?
Absolutely, over the next decade, I would say I started noticing it happen somewhere around 2007, 2009, when not even for the first year or two of social, because it was so open. So I think what happened is more money went into, everything that we used to make was so experimental, and it was very much like an artwork. And the beautiful thing about making digital work back then was you never knew whether something was going to be possible when you started it. It was through, and that's why, agile ways of working that they use in tech are so important, because it gives you an opportunity to change tack. You've got an overarching goal, but you have ways around a blockage, I guess. But you kind of have a vague idea that something is possible, and then you go out to make it real. That was very much how it used to work. And then, like I said, the first couple of years of social, even Facebook had open APIs. Like everything was still like open and playful, and you could do really interesting things. And suddenly, as the money started to go in there, and that ended up being, started to be an advertising platform, not really a social space in the same way, everything started to lock down. And suddenly you went from being able to do like, Twitter's a lot better. I will defend Twitter to death, because at least you can kind of rip the API out and do like crazy things with it. But you suddenly found yourself being really limited by what you were able to produce, and actually you couldn't use that power, that creativity, that force was very much put in a box of a I remember the Facebook ad. You've got a tiny little still image as a box, and you can't put any text on it or whatever, and that's what you had to play with. And that's not, as much as they would come into your agency and talk about the brilliant creative places that you could place things, there was nothing there. And I think the reliance on data, again, you can do such exciting things with it, right? You can use it for insight, you can find really awesome stuff, you can connect different feeds and do wild things. And instead it became very corporatized, and everything, you get to where you are now with a lot of programmatic stuff, which it's not creative at all. I'm sure there's a certain kind of creativity in there, in writing the algorithm and what have you, but there's no, that the human creative force is no longer there, and more money was going in there. And I think that's been the real shame. And I think it came to a head for me actually when I was working at Dare, because I had been at an agency called LBI, which is now, and then it was called Digitas LBI, and now I think it's just called Publicis something. But I was there again in these like heady days. I think social media had just happened. We were hacking stuff, making stuff, like doing crazy things with technology. We were also building like multi-million-pound platforms for very important brands, banking, hardcore banking apps, what have you. But when I then went to Dare, I realized that the digital creativity that was coming from one of the very best creative digital shops in the world, there were still some sparks of brilliance, but a lot of it was just putting what you saw above line in a banner ad, or like bashing out banner ads with the copy matrix. And I went, okay, there's something really, really wrong. And there are so many brilliant things about digital, like I said, the experimentation, the agile way of working, the ability to throw yourself into something without knowing it's going to happen, the really deep understanding of the audience that you're talking to, because it's vital if you're making an app or a service. Like all of that stuff is so brilliant, but instead none of it is happening. And actually, I think the interesting thing with this kind of shift back to contextual advertising that's happening because of all the, because of Apple, because of the rules around cookies, I think I'm hoping will get us into a more interesting space, because there's so much creativity in contextual advertising that's untapped.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. What's really exciting and very interesting from what you've shared with us today is there seems to be a consistent theme of it being the first time something's been used, or the first time code was appropriate, the first time you've done all sorts of things. And I wonder whether it's because of that originality, it was so creative and that was so powerful, whereas now it's just become very formulaic. You use the word wild, I think, whereas now it's all become quite tamed by the likes of social media companies saying, well, you can have an image, but it has to be an image and it has to be in this box. And that's just completely, it's completely...
So don't give me a box.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
Would it be right to make a link? This could be a stretch that I'm trying to force on you here, but is it right to make a link from that to... There's a great quote, and I just want to make sure I understand it, from this recent article in Adweek, which is preventing agencies from becoming the least creative places on earth, which we'll link to in this episode. But you've said that no amount of reporting from Cannes Lion to Kantar Millward Brown stops our relentless and self-destructive move towards the industrialization of what we deliver. Is that what you mean by the industrialization?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It is a process now. You know what I mean? It's what we do now. I always think if a machine can do your work, then you need to take that next step up into that kind of next creative space. And I do think there are really exciting creative spaces for us, but it is it's industrialized, and both coming from the technology platforms, but also and there are some brilliant procurement people out there, but that kind of heightened importance of procurement the whole way through the process, including creativity. I think we do ourselves a disservice not talking enough about the value add that we make through creativity. We tend to go, look, this is a really cool idea, and then the poor client has to decide, is it this really cool idea or this safe idea that I know is going to get results? And we don't do enough to prove that the more creative the idea is, I guess, that the more effective it is. I guess the only challenge to that is, as I said, Cannes Lion write about this all the time. Kantar write about this all the time. It is a well-known fact. You can kind of pull any kind of marketing, I'll call them like people like Mark Ritson, more of a philosopher. But everyone is in agreement that brilliantly creative work that answers the brief, sells more stuff, that is the most effective thing, and yet it just gets left behind.
I think it also gets misreported, doesn't it? And you can't. It's a funny one, and I think I know I sound very cynical when I reflect about our industry, but I do think that we've backed ourselves into these corners, or we've allowed it to happen. And if you listen to the big tech firms who are selling formulaic creative solutions, it makes sense because it's their solution, and that old saying, follow the money. Of course, that's how their business is reliant on selling this product. The trouble is we've almost all been hoodwinked, and I think maybe it happened. Maybe agencies were hoodwinked at a stage when it was new and original, and quite rightly we were exploring these new tools, and before we realised it, they'd taken the whole game.
Yeah, I think so. And actually, we kind of eagerly threw ourselves in it. If I think about the birth of social and like I said, Facebook before they closed everything off, how exciting was it to be able to build something and bring someone's friends into the digital experience on a brand's platform, or to write really fun things that just said you think this is your best friend, but this is actually the person that you've been spending the most time with, and actually bring ability to access that data, because it is really sticky data. It was so exciting. And now look back on some of that and go, God, we were kind of doing Facebook's work for them in a lot of ways. And certainly I have a very different view, when you put your data and ethics and privacy hat on, a very different view now to what I did very naively when we were first playing with it. I think none of us kind of foresaw the problems that it would cause. And certainly we were more than eager to take that stuff and play with it, and to effectively build cooler stuff with their with their pipelines for brands because it was fun.
Time, weather, and...
We interrupt this podcast to announce that we will never interrupt this podcast with ads. Ads that awkwardly nudge you to contact the pod's host, Giles Edwards, at giles@gasp.agency. Only the other day, some pod listening companies did just that, calling for guidance on research and brand identity. But we're definitely not asking you to do that. Anyway, back to the show.
My first sort of proper paid weekly job was a holiday job as a student, which was driving a forklift truck at the Ribena factory.
Call to action, episode 11, with the one and only Rory Sutherland. Not what we were looking for, but hang on a minute.
Yeah, and we've all got that magpie in us.
There we go.
And we're better for it, but we can trick ourselves sometimes with it, I think. I'm mindful of the time, and normally we have 2 listener questions, but that beautiful man Nick, who we were talking about pre-recording, has actually just sent me another one. So I'm gonna make an exception and ask 3, if I may.
Okey-doke.
So asking the general public for their opinion, be it on Brexit or boat names, is notoriously fraught with danger. But that's not stopped us asking. So we've had one in as we record from Nick. Nick Ellis, this is founder of Halo. With a glittering career like yours, you must have so much work that's been significant to you. But what work do you look back on and think that was career defining? That was an end of level boss moment?
I love that. Thanks, Nick. I've got a few that really stand out for me. And they're not necessarily big projects, and they're not necessarily big, even award-winning projects. I think I've made loads and loads of cool stuff, but the things that mean the most to me are the things that have made the biggest change. So I would say there was a piece of work that I did many years ago at LBI. It was a 10 grand brief from Macmillan Cancer Support to create an online form like a pre-filled online form that allowed you to email your local MP to talk to them about fuel poverty for cancer patients. And we took that brief, and through the research that we were kind of digging through, we just realised that most MPs put those pro forma letters in the bin. So we thought we need to do something else. And so we came up with the most crazy idea, and I'm still blown away to this day that it happened. The idea, it was called the Infinite, and it was a first internet-controlled robotic knitting machine that would take a beautiful message about what makes you feel warm and your name as a signature to this petition. It would, because we couldn't afford moderation, convert that into a knitting pattern and knit that into a scarf that ran for, I can't remember how long it ran for. It ran for months. And we had it in the basement of our building, we painted this beautiful wall that had live web feeds. This was maybe 2008, 2009, so pretty early on in terms of that kind of thing. Live web feeds, so you could watch your thing being knitted, collecting all of that data and all of these beautiful messages. Having to solve problems all the time, like this knitting machine we had, it only knits a particular way, which means it curls at the edges, and so then everything was coming down curled. And then we couldn't figure out how to create the right torsion. And then one of our tech guys, who's just amazing, was in the toilet using the hand towel things where you wave your hand in front of it and the towel comes out, and it went, this is brilliant for torsion. So we took it off the wall, agency, we pulled it apart, kind of affixed it to, so had all this wood, and we had a beautifully painted behind. My creative team, Tia and Emil, are just phenomenal, and kind of did this beautiful thing in the Infinite. And then it would break down all the time because it's doing what it wasn't meant to do. Like everything was a hack. Every day we were going, are we going to make this, or we've got the plan B that we can go back to what the client brief was and just bash out that form. And there were so many insurmountable things, like where do we get the wool from? We've got no cash. Where do we? So we, had an amazing producer, Ashley, who just did all of this crazy work to get everything to work and found parts for the machine and et cetera, and it, as I said, like amazing tech department who ripped apart this knitting machine and connected it to the web. And then we ended up with this amazing long scarf that was taller than Big Ben in the end and had thousands and thousands of messages. and delivered that to number 10. And I think one of the princes took a piece to the North Pole actually, and the law got changed, which is amazing. So now so that we did everything we said we were going to do, and it was super effective. And I think the loveliest thing is, because it broke down all the time, to make the fixing of the machine more interesting, you would have to put on a sheet mask to fix the machine just for fun. And it was all connected to our phones. So if it broke down, we'd all get an alert in the middle of the night and someone would have to go in and fix it. But this thing of like hashtag sheet mask ended up being this like huge thing. So you suddenly had all of these people following you online to to spot the sheet mask. So that took a life of its own, and I just absolutely adored that piece of work so much. I'm still really proud of it, and you can find it on YouTube actually. And I think for the technology of the day as well, it was cool.
Oh, it's so good. That is so good. We'll link to that in this episode as well, because that sounds incredible. Number 2 is from Chloe, who asks, if you were stuck on a desert island, would you prefer to have either art supplies to create or your favourite pieces of art to admire?
I think that's a really easy one for me. It's art supplies to create, 100%. Admiring takes you so far, but if I'm not actually making something, I think I would go mad. So yeah, absolutely create, 100%.
Yeah, no, I think that was an easy answer. I could tell which way you were going to go there.
Yeah.
The last listener question is from Danny. Danny asks, I read recently that one of your favourite things about this job is that we get to become experts in the most random things. What's the strangest place your curiosity has taken a deep dive lately?
Oh, that is so interesting. Most recently, I am learning about energy forecourts, retail spaces in really interesting places around the world. So I'm learning everything about the service stations, basically, doing some really interesting exploration about the future of a service station, once we kind of hit electric cars. And yeah, so that's absolutely fascinating. Like, what is a service station actually? Where, who uses them? How are they used differently in different countries all around the world? Who goes there? What are their drivers? I mean, it's really cool, actually. So that's...
My friends take the piss out of me because I famously, throughout my life, have adored service stations. I just love them. I think I've done a tour of most of them.
No, there's a really great book which is about the history of service stations in the UK, which I think is great. That they're really interesting places. I think we've got an old friend of mine, Zena Kay, who became obsessed with airports for a while. These kind of non-spaces, or these kind of spaces that you kind of travel to and through, and the architecture and the function of them is it's just fascinating, and how it's changed over time. I don't know, there's so much to go into there. It is.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating because there's so much weird stuff. Like where else do you see like a massage chair sat next to a public toilet? I mean, it's just bizarre and wonderful. I can't not add the fact that last time we spoke, you talked about juice consumption around the world.
Yeah,
so
you're
not lying. You do constantly learn about random things.
Yeah, exactly. I'm still deep in juice consumption, but I feel like the learning curve, my learning curve is maxed out there. I think, service stations is a new thing. There's washing machines before that, so everything to do with the washing machine.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Laura, the final part then of the interview is the 4 pertinent poses that we put to all of our guests, starting with, what advice would you give to your younger self?
Really good question. It sounds a bit silly, but just to say, don't worry, it's all going to work out okay. I think it's probably, not to kind of worry, not to worry so much about where things are going. I've always been a bit of a just do it person, but I think I would just flag early on that is, for me anyway, that's the key. That's been the key to my success. Just throw myself in the deep end with something that sounds really exciting.
Yeah, that's great advice. It's great advice. I think the anxiety levels when you are young and just starting out can be quite extreme, based around a myth that there's a right way of getting into whatever job role you want to do. But I think I regularly hear people saying similar things, which is actually really reassuring. And I think more people starting out need to hear it. So well said. Number 2, if you could banish one thing from the industry, what would it be and why?
I can't remember what I said last time. It's probably going to be around the same thing, but I think dicks, like as in shitheads, as in assholes. Look, I think, unfortunately, particularly coming through that creative side of the agency and in technology, that there's always been, I've always been the only woman in a really male world, and that's been okay for me, but it's not okay for a lot of people, and not just women. But I think it's still pretty hard for people who are a bit different to succeed. Even when I was going through the ranks, I had a creative director say to me, "Well, you can't work on this because girls aren't funny." I know people who actually are kind of younger than me, kind of the next generation down. Worked with one amazing woman who changed her name to her initials just because she wasn't getting any freelance work with her name because she was a woman. And that is similar to, your experience, I think, as any, it's, for example, if you're Black British, it's tough. If you're, so I would say just like banish that, like that attitude and the lack of listening to people and and bring in a more supportive culture.
There's some great initiatives, including ones that you've founded yourself, that are tackling that problem, but I think it's still a big fight. Number 3, Laura, any books that you can recommend to our listeners? And these don't have to be work related, they can be a mix or either side.
I'm a great lover of books. At the moment, I am reading, if you're only probably going to want to read this if you're from Sydney, but I'm reading a book called Eternity, and that is this fantastic story. So there was a guy who was basically like homeless for most of his life, who used to just scrawl in this beautiful cursive in chalk or kind of stone on the pavement, eternity, all over Sydney. And this is like, in the 50s. And it became kind of so famous actually now, like when we had the millennia, they created eternity on the Sydney Harbour Bridge for, in fireworks. But it's like a real Sydney thing, a real kind of icon. He's a bit of an icon, but very unknown person as a human. You just know him from this like beautiful piece of cursive writing. So this is a book about him, which is really interesting. And I'm a huge fan of, God, I just love everything. Huge fan of old Haruki Murakami. If you haven't read the old ones, you're missing out. Things like Hard Boiled Wonderland or Wild Sheep Chase. Those kinds of the classics of kind of magical realism, I guess you call it. But I lived in Japan for a while, and kind of spent a lot of time there. And there's just something so beautifully Japanese about them. The details, the fixation with food and preparing food, the real noodling in things like jazz music, and then on top of it, total bonkersness and fantasy. It's cool.
Amazing. We'll include links to those. And then number 4 is we always dedicate every episode to someone, and we bestow that honour to our guest, who has to give the reason why. So would you kindly dedicate this episode?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to sound silly, but I dedicate it really to my mum, and dad. But like my mum specifically she's just the most like magical, like open person, and why I really dedicate it to her, because she is such a deep thinker. So when it was art school, and I would, share my work with her, which was sometimes quite in your face, right? I got once, they've actually got it hanging in their house now, which I think is very cool. But part of my master's project was I blew up a 2 centimeter by 2 centimeter vagina from a porn site. It was internet porn was kind of in its infancy, but everywhere, and there was a lot of sexism, as there is now in the metaverse, with like unwanted advances, even when it was just in a chat room back then. And so it was a real kind of dialogue around that. But anyway, I sort of blew it up, and so the pixels were like 2 inches big, and then we knitted it and sewed it together, and it became this huge rug. So my parents have got this enormous pixelated clitoris basically in their house. But when we were making it, when I was making it, I realized I wasn't going to get it done in time. My mum used to volunteer up at the nursing home up the road from them. So she's like, right, I'm going to get these old ladies to knit stuff. And my mum didn't know what was being knitted. And we were marking it all out on the floor. And then one day she realized, and she kind of, and all the old ladies were asking what they were knitting. And mum's like, my daughter's art project. And then my mum wrote me this like huge, I want to say it's an email, but it might have even been a letter, that kind of started off like not like I don't understand what you've written or why or what have you. And then she worked through it all. Like, she's very philosophical, kind of worked through it all. And at the end, she's like, yes, and I get it. And like the feminist, discourse and blah, 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 blah. And this is really fantastic. And I'm going to tell the old ladies that they're knitting a vagina, and I'm going to tell them why. And I thought, like, that sums up my mum to a T. She's so open to, which I think is the most beautiful thing. She's just so open to other points of view and really thinking about stuff and working through it to develop her own idea about where things are. She's been so supportive of everything that I've ever done. But she's the only person I know who'll literally write me an email. It takes me half an hour to get through. It's just these incredibly deep thoughts about the world or the family unit or whatever it's going on in her life. I just think she's amazing.
Yeah. Oh, she really sounds amazing. She gives
great feedback on my work as well, which I think is incredible.
I don't doubt that at all. Doubt that at all. We very proudly dedicate this episode to your mum.
Thank you.
As a final call to action, everything we've discussed will be listed on the episode. But how else can our listeners get more Laura JB?
So on Twitter, I'm at Laura JAYBEE, Laura JB, and that's really my that's kind of my channel of choice. I think that with so many fingers and so many pies and making so much stuff, I always find I have so little time for. And I'm not much of a kind of a selfie or a hey, look, I had this for breakfast. So Twitter is a thing. Obviously, She Says. If you go to We Are She Says, you'll get the link if you are interested in doing that. I'm often privileged enough to be speaking different places, what have you. I can't think of what's coming up now, but I'm sure there's plenty of places there as well. Or I'm in grey a lot.
In a new office.
With my wonderful team here in a brand new office. I'm actually sitting in a room at the moment where if you don't move, the lights go out. So I'm sitting in total darkness. It's quite nice.
Wonderful. Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, we'll put the links to She Says, your recent Adweek article. We'll look up any upcoming events where you have a presence, and we'll include all of that.
Yeah, wicked. Thank you.
But Laura, it's been ace. I've adored talking. I've adored the fact that you've been sat in the dark as well, actually. That's wonderful too. But thank you so much. Thank you so much, Laura.
Oh, man, thank you so much as well. Pleasure.
And finally, thank you to everyone listening. If you've enjoyed the episode, please do share and review the podcast. Keep the questions and guest requests coming in. To get in touch, it's easy to find Gasp online. You can check out CTA Pod on Instagram or just email hello@calltoaction.co.
I can't get no call to action. I can't get no call to action, but I try, and I try, and I try, and I try.